In this video, I want to help you understand your voice type. You might have heard terms like bass, baritone, tenor, alto, and soprano, and maybe you wondered what that means and how it applies to you as a vocalist. If you sing on a worship team, and especially if you sing harmony, you are almost definitely gonna come across those terms in relation to specific harmony parts. Certain tutorials are gonna teach you the alto part or the tenor part or the soprano part. And I wanna help you understand in a basic way what that means and why, if you've seen some of my other videos, you may have noticed that I typically don't use these terms. And I'll explain why in this video. What these terms are referring to are different ranges of the male and female voice. And what's important to understand is that where your larynx sits in your throat, as well as the sides of your vocal cords and surrounding muscles, all of this determines where your speaking voice will naturally sit. And where your speaking voice naturally sits has a big impact on where your singing voice will naturally feel and sound best. The shape of your neck and face and the inside resonant spaces of your face, the vocal tract, those things also have a big impact on the sound of your voice. And this is why it's really a pointless and exhausting endeavor to try to sound like another person, because if you don't look exactly like that person, you cannot sound exactly like that person. In many cases, you can't even sound close to what they sound like tone-wise. Your tone, the color of your voice, is gonna be unique because you are uniquely created. David said, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." Be who God created you to be. Don't strive to be or sound like someone else. So important. Okay, so because of all those factors I was talking about, each one of us has a unique sounding tone. Some people's voices sound lighter and brighter, others sound deeper and fuller, and each one of us has a unique vocal range, which goes from the lowest note you can hit to the highest note you can hit. And more importantly, much more important and helpful to understand than what your full range is, each one of us also has what I like to call a sweet spot. In the vocal world, it's often called your prima voce or your tessitura, which is a range of notes, not from your lowest to highest, but it's the range of notes that feels the best and sounds the best in your voice. So whereas your full range might be 2 or 3 or 4 octaves total, the sweet spot in your voice is usually between an octave to an octave and a half in size. Why is this so important? Because you're going to sound best and feel most comfortable singing if you sing primarily in your sweet spot range. And this is where voice types come in, where the voice classification terms are used. We've got everything from bass to soprano, the lowest to the highest set of voice types. In classical music, tessituras are taken very seriously. There are over 25 different vocal subcategories, different tessituras. It's super interesting if you want to look into that more, but for singing in a contemporary worship music setting, all those categories are honestly not important for us to understand. In choral music, we've typically got a 4-part chorus, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, and it's even more simplified in a contemporary praise and worship context, where we typically see 2 or 3 parts happening, a melody, or in other words, the lead vocal, plus 1 or 2 harmony parts added, either both above the melody, both below the melody, or 1 above the melody and 1 below. It all depends on how high the melody sits and also who's singing on the team on any given day. In a contemporary worship context, we primarily see the tenor, alto, and soprano classifications used. Females are either alto or soprano, and male harmony parts all tend to get put in the tenor category, which is understandable on the one hand, because in this context, we typically don't want more than 2 harmony parts being added. However, it really is an oversimplification of the male voice. So for the purpose of this lesson and our discussion of these terms, I think it's more helpful to differentiate and give the males 2 categories, baritone and tenor, same as the females have the 2 categories. Because for one, I find that so many male worship leaders are not actually tenors, so they're straining to reach the high notes in many of the harmony lines. But also, many of the harmony parts that are labeled as a tenor part actually fall more in a baritone range. But guys see the tenor label and shy away from singing it because they assume it will be too high for their voice. I'll come back to this later because first, I want you to start understanding your voice and where your sweet spot sits so you can know how you fit into what I'm talking about. Let me stress that I am absolutely simplifying things here. You can get very complex and detailed about these things, but in very basic terms, here's how you can identify your sweet spot for singing in a contemporary worship context. Let's talk about guys first. A baritone will typically be quite comfortable singing from a low C to a middle C. The top of a baritone's sweet spot will sit on or slightly below his first bridge, or in other words, the first transition spot in his voice, that place where the male voice naturally shifts from chest to head voice, typically right around the D above middle C. If you've ever been singing in your chest voice and you feel your voice crack when you go high, you know what I'm talking about. A baritone will usually be very comfortable, most comfortable in his chest voice, and his tone has the potential to sound very rich and full. Let's talk about tenors. A tenor's voice can usually quite easily go higher than a baritone. A tenor's voice typically has a lighter, brighter sound than a baritone because it mixes in head and pharyngeal resonance more naturally, and so he can more easily go above that vocal bridge or transition spot. Altos and sopranos are basically the mirror of that, but for the female voice, the top of an alto's sweet spot will sit on or slightly below her first transition spot, which is right around the A above middle C. Again, that's the place where without vocal training, your voice will break from chest to head. An alto is usually most comfortable in her chest voice, which naturally has a fuller, richer sound, whereas a soprano's voice more easily goes above the transition spot, and it has a lighter, brighter sound, usually with a lot more head and often pharyngeal resonance in the mix. So let's just take a moment right now. We'll do this first for females and then for males to find where your sweet spot is. What I'll do is I'll start lower on the piano and I'll play each note one semitone at a time. And I want you to sing on a mum and take note of where your voice starts to feel less comfortable, okay? As we go, you'll see numbers on the screen, a number for each note. And when you start to feel less comfortable, keep singing, but tuck that number away in your mind and we'll come back and talk about it in a minute. I'll show you what I mean. Mum, 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 mum. I'm gonna stop there. I could keep going, but I know where my voice started to feel out of its sweet spot. And by the way, the reason why I'm using numbers instead of note names and why I'm not showing you the piano keys is because I don't want you to know what note we're on. For many of you, you would see a particular high note coming and get psyched out of hitting it. But if you don't know where we're at, it's gonna end up being a more accurate representation of what your voice can do. Okay, so let's try this, ladies, starting right here on a mum. One more time, here we go. Okay, now the guys starting here. And again. Good work. Okay, so let's talk about it. If you were feeling awesome and sounding best in the low notes, but then as we got to 12, 13, 14, or 15, you felt your sweet spot come to an end. And remember, it's not about if you can hit the notes higher than that, because we absolutely want to have range outside our sweet spot. But this is about where you feel and sound the best. So if that was coming to an end somewhere between the numbers 12 to 15, you would be classified as a baritone if you're a male or an alto if you're a female. But if you were feeling maybe a little less awesome in the lowest notes as we started, but then as we got to 12, 13, 14, or 15 and above, that's where your voice really started to shine. It was feeling great up there. You would be classified as a tenor if you're a male or a soprano if you're a female. You're more comfortable in the mid to higher range. And I encourage you to go back, do that exercise again another time or two to make sure you're getting pretty consistent results. So in a very basic way, that's how you can understand the voice type labeling on the parts you'll typically find in a worship context. A soprano lead line or harmony line is going to sit primarily on or above the female transition spot, which is right around that A above middle C, whereas an alto lead line or harmony line is going to sit primarily on or below that female transition spot. This has nothing to do with any specific song or any specific keys. It all depends on where the melody of a song sits in a particular key. For example, Nothing But the Blood, if I put it in the key of E, the melody line will sit up here. Oh, precious is the flow. That's a soprano range. And the harmony part would sit right here. Oh, precious is the flow. Really nice alto range. But if I change the key to C, the melody is going to sit really nicely in the alto's sweet spot. Oh, precious is the flow. And the soprano will sing a higher harmony part. Oh, precious is the flow. However, for guys in a worship context, like I mentioned earlier, we almost never see baritone as a label. So be aware of this, especially as you're looking at a harmony tutorial or something like that. Males typically all get assigned the tenor part, which sometimes is actually in a tenor range. It goes up to those high notes on and above your transition spot. But just as often, the written tenor part, or in other words, the male part, is actually in a baritone range, especially if it's a male leading the song. If there's another male singing a harmony part below him, it would usually be called the tenor part, but it's actually a baritone range. For example, take Nothing But the Blood again. If it was in the key of G and a male was leading right here, oh, precious is the flow. Another male vocalist would sing right here, oh, precious is the flow, which is a baritone range. But again, that would typically be labeled as a tenor line. This is why I typically don't use these terms. For one, because I find it's a bit confusing sometimes to know really what someone is referring to. Voice classification has come out of classical and choral genres, and that framework doesn't just easily apply in a broad stroke to contemporary praise and worship contexts, especially when we've got teams of all sizes and skill levels. You'll know if you've been through some of my vocal training courses that I teach you how to sing in what's called a mix voice, which is a blend of chest and head voice so that we can have a powerful, full-sounding, speech-like tone all throughout our range. I learned this technique from Brett Manning at Singing Success, how to sing in a mixed voice, and it has totally transformed the way I sing. The mixed voice is typically what you hear when you listen to modern worship leaders. It's typically a very chest dominant mixed voice tone, not always, but usually. Classical singing, on the other hand, doesn't use much chest voice, especially for women, but instead puts an emphasis on using head voice, which is a beautiful thing. But what happens is that a lot of females who are classically trained become very comfortable, very adept in their head voice in their mid to higher range, sopranos, right? Because that's what head voice does best. It loves to live in the higher notes. But then these sopranos with healthy, beautifully trained classical voices find themselves not necessarily fitting well into a contemporary praise and worship team context. The songs don't sit high enough for their range, especially the beginning verses of songs. And their voice doesn't always blend well with the other singers, and they're not sure why or how to change that. Let me encourage you if that's you. I've worked with so many singers in this boat who haven't yet developed their chest voice and their mixed voice. And then when they do train their voice in this way, they discover a whole new sweet spot that's deep and rich in the lower tones, but that had just been underdeveloped and thus underused or completely unused. And they may even realize, I'm actually an alto, not a soprano after all. Especially if your speaking voice sits primarily in chest voice, if you hear a richer, deeper quality in your speaking voice, I can assure you, your singing voice can absolutely have that quality as well. And it's so rewarding to develop that. And sometimes altos or baritones, if you're a male, start training their voices and find, oh my goodness, I actually can hit high notes. And they become really comfortable higher up in their range for the first time in their life. Your sweet spot absolutely can change as you train your voice and really discover what it can do. And so that's the second reason why I typically don't use these voice classification terms very much, because they tend to limit people. It's not the fault of the terms. It's not the fault of the genre it's come out of. It's us. We limit ourselves. Yes, there's the best part of our range, and I think it's really important to know that, which is why the exercise we did earlier, hopefully that can be helpful for you moving forward if you're the worship leader in choosing song keys where the melody fits well within your sweet spot. If your voice type is alto or baritone, at least at this point in your singing journey, you'll want most or all of a song to sit below your transition spot, on or below the D above middle C for males, A for females. And if you're a soprano or a tenor, you'll want most or all of a song, or at least the big parts of a song, the chorus and bridge, to sit on or above those transition spots. Same for singing harmony parts. Start to be aware of where that sweet spot is in your voice. Really get to know it and choose where you sing harmony based on what fits your voice most comfortably. That being said, this doesn't mean that the other parts of your range shouldn't be sung in. Quite the contrary. Maybe they don't sound as good or feel as comfortable for you yet, but they can sound and feel amazing with training when you develop those other parts of your voice. God has created our voices in such a wonderful way in that they can be developed and stretched and strengthened just like the other muscles in our body. If you put yourself in a box range-wise based on what you're most comfortable with or what you've always done, you are limiting yourself and you're limiting the possibilities of the beautiful sound that you can give to the Lord. This is not about performance. This is not about singing perfectly, but we are priests ministering to the Lord of heaven and earth. And so let's do that with excellence and with beauty as much as we can. My experience in the past, and I see this in so many others, is that we believe lies about our own voices. When I started singing, I preferred singing low because I hadn't trained my voice at all. My chest voice was much stronger than my head voice. And so I was put in the alto harmony group. And then for so many years, I believed the lie that I could only sing low. I'll only ever be able to sing low, which is actually not the truth. I just had to develop my higher range. And when you do that, it's not only really healthy for your voice, but it also makes you so much more versatile when you're in a worship team setting because you can choose to sing higher or lower depending on what is most needed in each moment of a song, which is another challenge I've found in using these labels is that it puts people not only in a box range-wise of where they want to sing, but in a box of where they end up singing for the whole song. And then the song ends up sounding the same from start to finish. Whereas a good vocal arrangement is ideally going to move you around to different parts of your range over the course of a song in order to build a song dynamically. For example, take any given song. Usually one singer will be on melody and one or two will be on harmony. So let's say I have an alto range female plus a soprano and a tenor range on my team. Nothing but the blood in the key of C. The melody sits here. Oh, precious is the flow. That's a very comfortable alto range just below her transition spot. The soprano will sing a high harmony up here. Oh, precious is the flow. That's a perfect fourth above the melody. And if I have a male tenor voice, he will sing here, a minor third below the melody. Oh, precious is the flow. That's if we put them in the place that their tessitura or sweet spot has determined they feel and sound best in. But in the beginning parts of a song, when the instruments are playing lightly, I don't think it fits best for everyone to be singing so high in their range for those harmonies. That will fit really well later on as the song builds. But what I would do if I was planning out the harmonies is for a first and maybe even second chorus, I would have the soprano female singing lower than the melody. So the melody's right here. Oh, precious is the flow. I would have the soprano female singing, oh, precious is the flow. But that's exactly where I told you the tenor line was, right? That's definitely not soprano range anymore, but the soprano is going to sing it. And the male is either going to sing the melody an octave down, oh, precious is the flow. Or if he's on a harmony line, I would put him right here, oh, precious is the flow. More of a baritone range, which was the soprano line I showed you, but now sung an octave down. So essentially, they've swapped parts and they're not necessarily singing in their sweet spot, but it's what fits the song best dynamically. The early parts of a song are softer and gentler, and so those lower parts of our range work really well. And in the later parts of a song where we want more energy, singing high in our range brings that power and punch we're looking for. I go into these concepts a lot more in some of my other training videos, so check those out if you're interested in learning more. But I encourage you, be willing to sing outside your comfort zone. Do what fits the song and the moment best. Just a quick note for team leaders. Obviously, encourage your singers to do what I'm talking about. Encourage them to get outside their comfort zone. Encourage them to train their voice and stretch their range and give them resources to help them do that. But understand that vocal improvement and instilling confidence in people is not something that can be rushed. We have to see it as the long game that it is and not put extra stress or pressure on our vocalists, or worse, cause them to damage their voice by singing outside their range. We have to understand that they're going to sing most confidently when they feel at home in their voice, especially when they're singing in a microphone in front of people. I think it's really so important to work with people where they're at, where their voices sound best, know their sweet spots, and set them up for success by choosing songs and keys and harmony parts that fit well within their best range of notes. If I had 2 alto range females and a baritone range male on my team this week, especially if they're newer to singing or I sense any insecurities, I probably wouldn't get any of them to sing high at any point in the song. I would get one of the girls to lead Nothing But the Blood in the key of C. Oh, precious is the flow, right? Alto range. I'll get the other female to sing below her. Oh, precious is the flow. Again, very comfortable for an alto. And then the male would sing below that. Oh, precious is the flow. Or even sing melody an octave down. Oh, precious is the flow. I'm putting them all in their sweet spot. I hope this video was helpful in giving you a basic understanding of the common voice types and how to understand where your voice sounds best. All this being said, if you're a worship team leader or perhaps a choir director, and it works best for you to use the soprano, alto, tenor voice classification terms, go ahead and do that. Do what works best for your context. But I encourage you, you may want to explore other ways of coming at things with your team. For harmonies, perhaps just referring to the harmony parts as singing above or below the melody, or calling them harmony 1 and harmony 2. I think that can be really helpful for getting people outside of the boxes they tend to put themselves in. If you and your singers are familiar with intervals, which I think is a really helpful skill for learning to sing harmony by ear, you could say to your vocalist on the chorus, you're going to start a third above the melody, or you'll start a fourth below the melody in the first chorus, and then on the second chorus, I want you to jump up to the third above the melody. I teach all this in my Learn to Sing Worship Harmony course, so if you're interested in more of that training, you can check that out at worshipvocalist.com. And if you have things that you do on your team that are working well, please share in the comments so we can all benefit from it. The point is, the voice classification categories are trying to help us find our place, which is so important. We've got to know our sweet spot, and they do help with that to a certain extent. But please don't let them limit you as you explore your voice, as you sing, as you lead worship. Don't put yourself in a box of only where your voice feels most comfortable, or the box that somebody else has placed you in a choir or worship team in the past, perhaps. I want to encourage you and challenge you to explore all the different parts of your range. I want you to be a versatile singer. If you see tutorials or parts written out for tenor, alto, soprano, try them all. Try singing them on par with a singer, or an octave down or an octave up. Know where your voice feels and sounds best, but don't set up camp and stay there long term. Train your voice, develop your voice so you can hit higher notes, so you can hit lower notes, so you can sing in a mixed voice. And above all, learn to love your voice. Speak life over your voice. Death and life is in the power of the tongue. So don't confess negative things over your voice. I can only sing low. I can't sing low. I hate the sound of my voice. My voice always cracks on that note. All of these things are speaking death. They're speaking obstacles. They're creating roadblocks and stress and anxiety that is absolutely unhelpful and unnecessary. Speak life. I can do this. I am able. I will hit that note. Even if you don't feel it yet, there's power in your words. There's power in our prayers and in speaking out gratitude. So spend time thanking God for the uniqueness of your voice. Thank Him for the ways that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. Invite Him into the process of discovery and development as you seek to improve your vocal skills. Blessings on you. Please leave your questions and comments below. I'd love to hear from you.